time for one of my most favorite lessons ever. This is called conjugation. Get ready to be delighted. I love to conjugate, and I love to teach how to conjugate. And you may think I'm crazy, and that's okay, because I probably am. But this is one of my favorite things to teach, and so I put a bunch of people partying on the front of this lesson called conjugation. The learning objectives for this lesson are that you are able to define what conjugation means, state the 3 different kinds of verbs in Spanish and how to determine which kind they are, explain the steps on how to conjugate an AR verb, and conjugate verbs appropriately for this subject. Here we go. Conjugation, what is it? Conjugate, is something we do to verbs. Only verbs. Only, ever, no exceptions. You can only ever conjugate a verb. What does it mean? To conjugate a verb means you change it to say who's doing it. To say who's doing the verb. We actually conjugate verbs in English too. It's something that we don't learn systematically in English class anymore, although I think a long time ago people did. And we do it naturally without thinking, and obviously people who speak Spanish do it naturally without thinking. But if you're going to learn to communicate in Spanish, read it, write it, speak it, understand it, you need to learn how to do it. So it's such an important part of learning the language. Here's what English conjugation looks like. We take a verb, to eat. In English, all of our verbs, before we conjugate them, have to in front of it. To eat, to sleep, to run, to jump, to speak, to teach. And then in English, when we conjugate it, we drop the to, and we say who's doing it. I eat, you eat, he eats, she eats, we eat, you all eat, they eat. We don't do much to our verbs besides dropping the to off in front of it. And then in the third person, the he, she, we add an S, usually, in the present tense. So again, conjugating a verb means taking a verb and changing it, doing something to it, to say who is doing the verb, who is performing that action. There are 3 kinds of verbs in Spanish: AR, ER, and IR verbs. And the way to tell what kind of verb we're using is just to look at the last 2 letters of the verb before you conjugate it. So these are called infinitives. Verbs, before you conjugate them, are called infinitives. And I put some examples down at the bottom of this slide of AR verbs. Notice they all end in AR. Ayudar, bailar, buscar, caminar, trabajar. There are ER verbs: comer, escoger, beber, correr, hacer, tener. And then there are IR verbs, verbs that end with the letters IR. Escribir, dormir, vivir, salir. I would say the vast majority of verbs in Spanish are AR verbs. Most verbs end with AR. There are fewer ER verbs and a lot less IR verbs. But I can promise you this, take my word, any verb in Spanish is going to end in either AR, ER, or IR. There are no other kinds of verbs in Spanish. So any verb that you encounter is going to fall into one of these 3 categories in its infinitive form. That means before you conjugate it. So we're gonna change the verbs, but before we change them, they're going to end in AR, ER, or IR. Today, we're going to just focus on AR verbs because there's the most of them, and we need to start somewhere. So let's start with AR verbs. So any verb that ends in AR, here's how you conjugate it. You take an AR verb like hablar. Hablar ends in AR. You're going to drop the AR off the end, and you're left with the stem. The stem is the verb after you've taken off the 2 letters at the end, either the AR, the IR, or the ER. In this case, just AR. So You're left with habla. The last thing you need to do is add the new endings to the stem, depending on who's doing it. So let me show you so you can understand what I'm saying. If I talk, I add an O. Yo hablo. I talk. If you talk, we take the AR off and we add AS. Tú hablas. You talk. If he talks, we take the AR off and we add an A. Él habla. If she talks, we take the AR off and we add an A. Ella habla. She talks. You, formal, the usted, talk. Usted habla. So we add an O for yo, AS or as for tú, and A for él, ella, or usted. For nosotros, if we all talk, we drop the AR and we add amos. Nosotros hablamos. We all talk. If we're in Spain and we're saying you all talk, we drop the AR and we add ayis. Vosotros habláis. You all talk. If they talk, we add an. So drop the AR and add an. Ellos hablan. They talk. Ellas hablan. They talk for just girls. Ustedes, you all talk, is ustedes hablan. So you all talk. So in Spanish, we drop the last two letters, and then we add the different endings depending on who is doing it, who is performing the verb. And the endings are always going to be the same for él, ella, and usted, and ellos, ellas, ustedes. So the endings are always going to be the same for yo, tú, and then él, ella, usted, nosotros, vosotros, and then ellos, ellas, ustedes all have the same ending. So that's one example of how to conjugate a verb. So let's see another one. You take the infinitive, that's a verb that's not conjugated, and it still has the AR, the ER, or the IR ending. And like I said, this lesson is just working with AR verbs. So I took the infinitive, ayudar, means to help. I dropped the AR ending, and I'm left with ayud. That's the stem of the verb, ayud. And then I add the different AR endings. Yo ayudo. I help. Tú ayudas. You help. Él ayuda. He helps. Ella ayuda. She helps. Usted ayuda. You, formal, help. Nosotros ayudamos. We all help. Vosotros ayudáis. You all, in Spain, help. Ellos ayudan. They help. Ellas ayudan. They help. Talking about just girls. And ustedes ayudan. You all help. So the best thing, once you kind of understand this process, the best thing that you can do is just memorize in order the endings. O, as, a, amos, ayis, an. That way, if you find an AR verb that you need to conjugate, you know the steps, take the AR off, figure out who's doing it, and then add the appropriate ending. So that's how I would tell you to approach learning how to conjugate any verb. Memorize the endings. O, as, a, amos, ayis, an. So why don't you give it a try? Conjugate, grab a piece of paper or something close to you, and try to conjugate the verb bailar for all of the people who could do it. Yo, tú, él, ella, usted, nosotros, vosotros, ellas, ellos, ustedes. Do the same thing with tomar. Remember the steps. First, you need to drop the AR, and then you need to, you need to add the new endings. O, as, a, amos, ayis, an. When you feel like you've got it, then you can move to the next slide. Yo bailo, tú bailas. Él, ella, usted baila, baila, baila. Nosotros bailamos. Vosotros bailáis. Ellos bailan, ellas bailan, ustedes bailan. Tomar. Yo tomo, tú tomas. Él toma, ella toma, usted toma. Nosotros tomamos, vosotros tomáis. Ellos toman, ellas toman, ustedes toman. How'd you do? You getting the hang of it? How about some more examples? Go ahead and pause the video and see if you can conjugate these 8 verbs for the person that I've indicated to conjugate them for. Remember the 2 steps. Drop the ending, the AR ending, and add the new endings. O, as, a, amos, ais, an. Did you have pago? Ella descansa. Nosotros usamos. Tú compras. Vosotros miráis. Usted trabaja. Él lava. Ellos mandan. Good. I hope that you got them all right. Time to check yourself. Can you define what conjugation means? Can you state the 3 different kinds of verbs in Spanish and determine how to and explain how to determine what kind of verb it is? Can you explain the steps in conjugating AR verbs? And can you appropriately conjugate for the subject? Good job. Talk to you soon.